Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day whenever it is that you're watching this. Thanks for joining us and learning about salamanders. I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Eli. I'm a senior ecology student at NMU and I love amphibians. I'm really, really grateful to have this opportunity to talk about something I love. And I do feel really lucky to have had the opportunity to study such an amazing, beautiful system these past 4 years at NMU. Oops. So what is an amphibian? And some of you probably already know this, but we'll cover it anyway just to give some background. Um, so most of you are probably familiar with the first four on that list. The fifth is a really strange animal. It's the worm-looking guy on the top right. Uh, very little is known about caecilians. But yeah, frogs, toads, newts, salamanders. That's what we have in Michigan. And most of them live a biphasic lifestyle, which means they're kind of part-time water dwellers, part-time land dwellers. Most amphibians lay eggs in the water. Their larvae hatch either tadpoles, polywogs, salamander larvae, whatever you want to call them. And typically they spend a few months in the water, metamorphose, which means they lose their gills, grow legs, develop lungs, and ride out the rest of their time on land. And that's actually why Jill Leonard, who's a fish biologist at NMU, agreed to work on this project with me because she pretty much strictly works on only fish. And I was able to convince her by saying, look, these guys spend a decent amount of time in the water. Like, it's not that far off. But yeah, I think she had fun with it anyway. So um, amphibians are ectothermic, which is what we used to call cold-blooded. Um, and basically it means they don't produce their own body heat. And that's going to be important later on when we talk about this migration that happens usually in April, because these salamanders are emerging in the spring when there's usually still snow on the ground and freezing rain conditions. They haven't eaten anything all winter and they're walking hundreds of meters across snowbanks and they're not producing any body heat, which is truly insane to think about. And it just makes it all the more amazing and impressive and spectacular. Another thing, and this is another factor that separates reptiles from amphibians, is they don't have scales, they have permeable skin. And most amphibians actually breathe through their skin and drink through their skin. So that makes them really sensitive to any environmental change. If you have pollution in the water or in the air or in the soil, amphibians are going to uptake that pollution directly. There's nothing stopping it from entering their bloodstream, which is why we often call amphibians a canary in the coal mine in ecosystem, because if something changes, you're going to see amphibian populations crash first. So that's why they're great to have around. Biologists like to monitor amphibian populations, and you see it in our national parks, the Forest Service. A lot of biologists use amphibians as kind of the baseline for ecosystem health. So we have quite a few amphibians in the UP, and ones you see around here, a lot of you are probably familiar with garter snakes, red belly snakes, ringneck snakes, maybe lots of spring peepers, mink frogs, and actually that picture in the top right is a male spring peeper in amplexus, which means he's trying to mate with a mink frog, which is so strange. I saw that last spring and thought I would share. And so a lot of people don't know, though, that we have 12 species of salamanders in Michigan, and that's just because they're so rarely seen. You don't see them hanging out on lily pads or around ponds. They're usually under leaf litter or burrowed underground. But that doesn't mean they're not there and they're not important. Actually, one stat that I love to relay to people is in Northeast hardwood forests, redback salamanders account for more biomass than every other vertebrate species combined. So they they have a huge impact, and they are around even if we don't see them all the time. And that's true in the UP as well. So after I did my first season of research on this, and please ignore my salamander pun there, breaking news. But anyway, I did this season of research and on these blue spotted salamanders, and I noticed something really strange. A lot of, you can see on the left hand Tupperware container there, those larger looking ones. And so I'd say maybe a tenth of this population were these absolutely massive females that were like 3 times the size of any of the other males or females we were seeing. And they kind of had dull coloration, almost no spotting. And they reminded me a lot of these polyploid hybrid species complex that we'd see downstate and in other parts of Michigan. And it is so bizarre. It's an all-female population that is able to clone themselves through a process called parthenogenesis, but they're also able to uptake spermatophores from males of other species. And if they're similar enough, they can incorporate that DNA into their own genome. So they reproduce through sexual and asexual reproduction, and might be a hybrid between 4 or in some cases even 5 different species of salamanders. It's like something from outer space. But anyway, I thought they kind of looked like them, but there had been no records of any polyploid salamanders in the Upper Peninsula, so I kind of dismissed it. But anyway, I reached out to this amphibian geneticist at the University of Minnesota at Morris, Dr. Rob Denton. Sent him an email and said, hey, I have some salamanders that kind of look like polyploids. And he immediately agreed that they did look like them, but wasn't sure. So he wanted me to send him like a dozen of these Tupperware containers full of salamanders in the mail, which apparently, yes, you can do. And the reaction of the guys at UPS when I told them I wanted to ship live salamanders to Minnesota was pretty funny. But he got back to me the next season saying that they were indeed polyploids, and that's the first record of this super strange species complex in the Upper Peninsula, and we have them right at Presque Isle Park in Marquette, which I thought is pretty cool. And so they actually migrate with the blue spotted salamanders, and they're likely probably interbreeding with them as well. But if you go out this spring, you'll definitely see them. They're around. They're the really big gray ones. So then the little blurb about tiger salamanders, I stumbled across a paper last year that detailed an MSU researcher's discovery of a population of tiger salamanders in this lake in the Kingston Plains area, which is east of Munising. And they're 100% aquatic, which isn't normal for the species. So basically, being neotenic means they kind of stay in the larval state their entire lives and actually sexually mature in the larval state, reproduce in the larval state, and never metamorphose into adult salamanders. And no one knows the cause of this. There's probably some weird hormonal things going on with thyroid hormone that might have to do with the environmental conditions in the Kingston Plains because a lot of it's been logged. But anyway, we don't know, and I wanted to find out. So that researcher had actually passed away, but I was able to get in touch with one of his grad students at the time. And he gave me some more information about how to find the lake and everything. And I spent pretty much all summer, last summer, setting traps, free diving, dip netting the lake. I scoured the lake with the landowner's permission. And most of the landowners thought it was pretty funny that I was digging around for salamanders all summer, but I never found any. It doesn't mean that they're not there necessarily. but I think that they are likely extirpated, which is still valuable knowledge to know that there's probably no tiger salamanders in the Upper Peninsula anymore. But it's possible, and I think that there's some more searching to be done. Maybe I'm just a poor tiger salamander finder. But yeah, just interesting stuff. And here's another interesting little thing. So over the past few years, I've found a handful of these albino spotted salamanders. And spotted salamanders normally look like, in the bottom right photo, they're the one on the left, all black with these yellow spots. And these ones are kind of like pinkish. They have the typical albino red eyes, but they keep the yellow pigmentation. And I've only found them in one location, but I found a decent amount of them in this spot, and actually some albino egg masses too, which is really weird to see because normally in the egg masses they have black little larvae, but they were completely white. So, I don't know if they're found elsewhere in the UP. They might be, and there'd be some cool research to do on that. We were actually getting this published in the Herpetological Review. Just a fun little natural history note. So let's move on to my favorite, blue-spotted salamanders. So like many salamanders in the Midwest, their genus is Ambystoma, which means mole salamander. And they live in damp areas, kind of under moss, rotting logs, and just wet dirt under the leaf litter. So you don't see them very often. And they eat slugs, worms, insects. And people always ask, what do they do in the winter when it starts to get cold? Do they hibernate like mammals do? Or because obviously they don't migrate down south. They're not geese. But yeah, they burrow really deep. I think they've been found 8 feet underground, and they try to get below the frost line, and they ride out the winter that way. And really amazing when you get the first warm rain of spring, and that's relative. It's like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They think there's a pheromone release, and it triggers all the salamanders to emerge at the same time, and they make this truly epic migration from the forest to their breeding ponds. And they migrate in mass, and you see them climbing over snowbanks, like I said. And so the females will lay their eggs, and they return back to the woods and spend the summer under logs and moss and everything. And then their little larvae metamorphose in late summer, typically. And that's kind of the blue-spotted salamander life cycle. So I got a tip from a grad student my freshman year. A few friends and I did that the salamander migration might be happening around Marquette. We kind of knew the conditions to look for, so I went out to Presque Isle Park, actually a few spots. And I was, I had low expectations. I was hoping to see a couple salamanders, maybe, like, that'd be cool if I saw a blue-spotted salamander. But this one particular rainy night, there were thousands, like almost covering the road, crossing, and we were in total awe of this scene. And it was amazing until cars started zipping by, and every car just squished a ton of salamanders. And I remember just feeling sick to my stomach about it, like there's, this road shouldn't be open, but I was wondering, is this really negatively impacting the population or not? Is it just a few salamanders getting hit? So I remember going to bed that night, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And the next day I went to Dr. Jill Leonard's office and told her about the problem and some ideas I had that how we could fix it. So she and I came up with a research plan for the next spring. I got in touch with the Superior Watershed Partnership as well, and they helped me orchestrate some of that. And yeah, we came up with this research plan. So I assembled this list of local people who were interested in helping. A lot of them were NMU students, a couple professors, people at the SWP, and I had been going out and checking for a couple weeks because the conditions seemed right. With no success, no salamanders were out. Finally, a friend and I were out with headlamps looking, and he saw a salamander. So I knew the migration was starting. So I sprinted back to my car because I had no phone service. So I drove to campus really fast, sent the drafted email that I already typed up. And within a half hour, I think there were 15 or 20 people during exam week. Super late at night, freezing rain. And I was just so proud of all these friends and interested people that wanted to help do this research, that who cared, and were willing to suffer in these miserable conditions with me. So yeah, that year over 400 salamanders were hit by cars. It was actually 430 some. And what we did and how we estimated the proportion that were hit was, if you look in that photo, there's a kind of a pink tag on that salamander's back. It's called VIE, or visual implant elastomer. And it's just this non-toxic dye that glows under a black light. And we injected the salamanders with different colors on different nights. And that's how we knew which ones were marked. And we used the number of marked ones that were tagged that were then later hit to estimate the proportion. We also used pit tags, which are these little glass tags that have a frequency that can be picked up by a scanner. And then each salamander had an individual number assigned to it. So we did little mini salamander surgery right there in the field and implanted these tags into their side, which was a really fun learning experience. And yeah, we took photos of all the salamanders, weighed them, measured them, tagged them. And it required a big team, and I was glad that everyone was out and willing and able to help. It was really fun. So after we ran all the stats and counted all the dead salamanders, we estimated that 10 to 20% of these guys were getting hit as they crossed, because they crossed the road very slowly. And so then digging into the literature, I found a study from 2005 where this team of researchers showed that road mortality of anything above 10% will likely lead to population decline in this genus. Here's some photos from the research. That's what that VIE looks like under blacklight. So it's really easy when you're going along the road with a blacklight to, find the ones that had been tagged. That's Dr. Leonard. Looks like she's pit tagging a salamander in that photo. She was actually really sick that week. I remember she had lost her voice and came out anyway with like hardly being able to speak. So I was having to kind of interpret for her. And that's a bucket of squished salamanders. So like I said, these guys are really important. Blue spotted salamanders are kind of the bottom of the food chain. Everybody likes to eat them. And that's true in terrestrial ecosystems where foxes, snakes, toads, raccoons eat salamanders, and aquatic ecosystems. A lot of fish like salamander eggs and larvae. So without them, it'd be tough for ecosystems to function, just because there's this great source of food. And then something that you guys might like to hear is juvenile salamanders love eating mosquito larvae. So more salamanders around means less mosquitoes in the summer. And in the context of mosquito-borne illness, I think there's a huge role for amphibians to play in help mitigating human diseases. And I mentioned before that they're bioindicator species. So they're important to have around. And in Marquette, we want a healthy population of amphibians so we can kind of use them as a baseline. And then Marquette has an opportunity to set an example as to what good conservation looks like. We have the science to support it. So let's put the science to use and implement changes to mitigate this mortality. And I think Marquette's done a great job of that. So last spring, we got this road closure approved by the city, right on Peter White Drive. If you're driving out at Presque Isle Park, like towards Sunset Point, it's just a couple 100 yards of road where they cross. And those are the signs for this year. I think the road closure starts nights starting next week. But yeah, last spring going out and seeing all the salamanders crossing safely made my heart really happy, and it made all of those cold, sleepless nights really worth it. It was great to see. But in that photo, you can see where they migrate from the interior of Presque Isle, where they spend their winters, across to the wetlands where SWP has the bog walk set up, and right kind of by Moosewood Nature Center. So the road closure was a great solution, but the disadvantage of it is you kind of need to predict when the migration is going to happen and when you need to close the roads. So we've been kind of doing this blanket closure for about a month, hoping that captures the migration. But the advantage of these are called eco passes is it doesn't matter when the migration happens, they're always there, and you don't have to stop traffic. Cars can still drive by, and the salamanders just kind of they get funneled into a tunnel. And we know they've been really successful. There was a study in Maryland where they looked at the success rates of salamanders navigating these, and it was really, really high. Almost all of them were able to get through the eco pass and make it to their breeding locations. But we need funding. So I think that's kind of the eventual plan, is to implement these eco passes in Marquette. It's a great solution. But yeah, we're waiting on the money for it. Yeah, so get in touch if you're interested and want to go find salamanders with me or see this migration. I love taking people out and showing them. And I think that when people have firsthand experiences with our wildlife, they're a lot more likely to care. And when these conservation issues come up, and this goes for anything, I think that's why you see fishermen and hunters a lot of times are sometimes leading at the forefront of conservation issues, because they're the ones who have had a lot of personal experiences and it touches their lives. But yeah, I'd love to show people this incredible species that lives right under our feet. Take down my contact info. And the migration can be kind of fickle. The timing is really key, and it's hard to predict. So what I've done in the past is just kind of made a contact list of phone numbers and emails. And then when I see salamanders and I know the migration's starting, I can send like a mass message to everyone. And we can meet at Presque Isle Park and do a little salamander walk, and people can ask questions and see salamanders up close. So I'm really grateful for all the help I've got. I mean, I couldn't have done this research alone. And the Superior Watershed Partnership helped me navigate things with the city and get the road closure approved. And then I got funding from a grant from the Chicago Herpetological Society. I received a Lundin Fellowship for summer research last year. SSAR, the Society for the Study of Reptiles and Amphibians, gave me a really generous grant as well. And then I can't say enough about the NMU biology department. I've had really, really wonderful advisors. I feel like I could go to anyone in the department and ask for help, whether it was with biostats or field methods for this project or borrowing equipment. Yeah, NMU has been great and really supportive in helping get my research permits approved. I can't say enough great things about the biology department here at Northern. I've had a great time here. And then all the volunteers who sacrifice their sleep and their warmth to come out and find salamanders and make this happen. So I really think this is a great example of what conservation in practice looks like. It's an example of applied science to management. And that's what we need to be doing as scientists, is kind of bridging the gap between the academic literature and and management in our parks and our cities. And I hope this could be an example. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And thanks to all of you guys for watching this. Please reach out to me with any questions, or like I said, if you want to go find salamanders, I'm happy to show people. So I hope you would enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks to the UPEC for inviting me to speak. Take care, everyone.